conversation that we're having now and the rhetoric that we're hearing is that if Mamdani's elected with no other option, that cops will just run for the door and they'll leave.
From Newsweek, Ron DeSantis predicts NYC cops will flee to Florida if Zohran Mamdani wins. I don't know about Florida, but Florida's probably a good choice. What do you guys think? You think if this commie wins mayor, the cops are going to flee?
Yeah, I mean, and why wouldn't they, by the way? I mean, it's already...
They're commies too.
No, most cops are not, clearly.
In New York, I think they are.
No, not even in New York. Come on.
Having, lived in New York for 5 years and routinely interacted with NYPD, I think they're mostly default lib, and default lib is, to be fair, not commie, but when the communists get power and say, go do communist things, they go, okay, boss. Like when they painted Black Lives Matter in front of Trump Tower, and then 26 officers were like, you got it, boss. It's an illegal theft of public funds without city council approval, and they're painting a public message on a street, which violates federal law, but we're going to enforce it anyway. Right. And then NYPD started arresting a bunch of people. Or how about when in New York during COVID, when they shut down churches and the cops were like, what was it? No more First Amendment? All right, we'll arrest people at the church. That doesn't sound like salt of the earth. That sounds like commie.
And that goes on to bigger, like the bigger question. It's what won't you do? What won't you do? Right? Like, what won't you do? I like when I think about cops, I always think about the Bronx Tale, and the scene where it's like he's talking to Sonny's talking to the young kid, and he tells him, I give these guys just enough so that they need me, but not enough that they don't need me. And that's kind of like how cops are, right? Like, you make a decent living, but most cops live paycheck to paycheck. Like, I listen to cops tell me, oh, you got to retire at the end of the month so you don't have to wait a whole month to get a check. I'm like, why? Also, because I got to get that check to pay my bills. And I'm like, you're retiring and you don't, and you can't go a month without getting a paycheck. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, dude, definitely don't retire. Like, definitely don't retire. You should have a second job. You should be doing more overtime. Like how much money you got in the bank? And like, so to me, it's like, that scares me, because at the end of the day, and everyone's saying it here, they're not going to leave. They have bills to pay. They need that check. They need to feed their family. They need to do that. And that's the exact mentality that Tim Poole is criticizing. He's saying, you'll do anything. You're a God-fearing man, but you'll shut a church. You'll violate the First Amendment that you swore an oath to. How far does that go? How far does that go? Like that's and that's a question that I think, I don't think we know. Like, I don't think we know. Like, I think I do. And I think that, unfortunately, I consistently say, I'm like, I don't think that they have a limit, cops.
I think the overall conversation that we're having here is it's not so much about communism. It's about authoritarianism. And we have to see that the right, that authoritarianism is where the right and the left handshake and they agree on, because they both want you to do it, and they both don't want you to question things. Okay, so that's the conversation that we should really be having. I also want to go back to your point, John, that a lot of cops live beyond their means. We see, I see a lot of cops who, they you reach 5 years and you're going for that BMW 5 Series, and we have a lot of young cops who live beyond their means, young cops who could have left in a mandate to better departments, but didn't, and I think a lot of that is not because they're living paycheck to paycheck necessarily, but because they're living beyond their means.
I'm glad that you brought this up, Marlon, because I was doing some research about this discussion, obviously, for this episode, because I thought to myself that, deep in their hearts, are cops really communist? Absolutely not. And I think they're boxed in and forced into a position to carry out draconian laws because most people are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think I think it was Dave Ramsey. I was listening to Dave Ramsey, and I like some things he says, some things I don't. But he says that I think it's most Americans are 2 paychecks away from being homeless. I think he gave numbers like 70 or 80%, pretty high alarming number. And to the point to that is also from doing some research that around 50 to 60% of Americans are living in substantial credit card debt, and which encompasses cops also, right? We said cops are people too. A majority of cops are living in credit card debt. What happens? I think it's also part of the ability to hold cops in this position, kind of almost like slavery, is by not having cops up to date in contracts. Right? When a cop is out of contract, it keeps cops from retiring. It keeps cops from leaving. Think about it. How many cops have you spoke to? Anyone here in the chat? How many cops have you spoke to, Marlon and John? Like, oh, I can't retire yet. Contract's coming out next year, or the contract's about to come out. They're waiting for that contract, and they're waiting for that retro pay. But while you're behind the 8 ball and you don't have a contract and you're not getting raises that correlate and correspond with inflation, you're now going into credit card debt, because most people do not live within their means. And if you do live within your means, if you're not getting increases and raises on your pay, then you'll fall behind because you're not keeping up with inflation. And so what happens is cops get this substantial amount of retro money, and some cops that just don't understand finances think it's a great thing. A lot of cops go, oh, it's great getting a retro. I'm like, well, it's not great, because look at all the interest you've lost, the opportunities you've had to invest in other avenues for your money you lost out, and now you're getting a substantial amount of money. And most people, I think, have to pay credit card debt. You accumulate so much debt because you're not keeping up with your means. You have all these bills to pay, and now you're paying, when it comes to credit card, interest on interest and interest, and it gets compounding, and it's overwhelming. And I think people deal with anxiety. Most of the anxiety I think that people deal with is finances, and that's where cops are vulnerable. And the system preys on vulnerability. You're vulnerable because of your finances. You're vulnerable because some cops need specific tours to work. You know, a lot of cops, I remember, a lot of my cops, their wives would give them a hard time if they worked a different tour than what was expected. And, you know, it's easy to say, well, she married a cop, she should think different. Well, listen, I used to joke around. I had some cops I worked with, and I would say that these cops, they could be in the middle of a shootout. John and Marlon, you tell me if you know anybody like this, anybody in the chat. I had cops I knew that they could be in the middle of a shootout, and they would probably pick up the phone for their wife while they're involved in that shootout, because if not, there would be hell to pay. So, unfortunately, cops live under the thumb, and I think a lot of it is different factors that we've said today that contribute putting cops in positions where they carry out draconian laws. And some people here said in the comments earlier that people will speak out when they have other options. And that's a good point. And I think that's what this should be. This should be a learning tool. Give yourself other options so that, God forbid, you are put in a position that you can speak out, meaning that you have your finances in order, right? You have several months of a nest egg that, God forbid, you had to leave the job, that you could survive, like John said, that you wouldn't have to depend on that paycheck, that you had 6 or 8 months of a nest egg that you could survive on.
You've just watched a clip from our live episode. Click the description to watch the full episode. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos just like this.